But thank you for being here. I'll keep monitoring the waiting room and make sure that everybody gets in as they show up. But thanks for being here. We appreciate your time. I know it's a busy season for everybody, especially when you're doing this Get Out the Vote work. And so we appreciate you taking some time to chat with our wonderful speakers that we have for us today, and just sharing some insights and thoughts across our many varying campuses and roles. So today we're in partnership, the NASPA CLDE KC is in partnership with the Andrew Goodman Foundation and Campus Vote Project to put on this event for Get Out the Vote, experience and insight on making everyone's voice heard. And so I just want to give a little bit of background on the CLDE KC. If you're not familiar, my name is Lindsay Wolker, she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as the interim director of the Office of Leadership and Civic Engagement at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And I'm also the co-chair-elect for the CLDE KC, along with Mike McFadden, who's on this call as well. And so we really look to create space for professional development, idea generation, scholarship discussion related to civic education and public service. And so, you know, helping support people who are doing democratic engagement work, helping people that are doing service work, community engagement, all things related to this whole broad scope of civic learning and democratic engagement work. And so if you're not currently a member of our KC, you can definitely do that on your engagement portal. Through your NASPA membership, you can add us. We send out, you know, monthly newsletters and just have a lot of events like this one and a few other voter related events coming up for this year, but also just a whole breadth of things, webinars, blogs, all sorts of good stuff that we're sharing out through our KC and through partnerships with a lot of other KCs as well through NASPA and a lot of other organizations like the ones we have represented with us today. So just to give you a little bit of some upcoming things that are happening for us. There's a workshop with Ask You, the American Democracy Project, and All In Challenge tomorrow. And I'll send out the slides to everybody from this presentation today if you're interested in joining that, a workshop to prepare for elections and debates. And then we have information here about becoming a poll worker. As you know, there is a dire need for poll workers across the country. This will be my first year working on early voting, so I'm excited to do that. But if you have interest, availability, and you have the capacity to serve as a poll worker, feel free to sign up or get more information on Power to the Polls so that we can make sure that polling places are staffed and that they're not closed down. We know what areas typically get closed down if they're not staffed, and so we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to, again, have their voices be heard across the country. And then we put out 2 blog posts, one in partnership with the New Professionals and Grad Student KC called Where Do I Start If I Want to Engage in CLDE Work? That their link for that is on the PowerPoint. And then we also created a blog post for if you attended the CLDE conference that happened throughout the summer and into the fall. There were students who presented at CLDE who talked about righting historical wrongs on campus, and they came up with 4 action steps. And so based on that, we created a blog post for a call to action for student affairs professionals and how we can continue some of the good work that students are pushing for and that our institutions should be pushing for. So with that, I want to introduce our wonderful speakers for the day. So we have Chadwick Leonard. I'll let him, elaborate on his introduction, but he's joining us representing Campus Vote Project. He's the Florida State Coordinator for CPV and works with their Legacy Initiative to address HBCU and Black student voting. And so we are happy to have him joining us today. And then we also have Christina Sanders from the Andrew Goodman Foundation, Senior Program Manager of Expansion. Christina has also worked with the HBCU Summit that we were talking about with Chad with Campus Vote Project, and does a lot of great initiatives on helping educate, organize, build issue campaigns, helping get out the word for how to engage others in this democratic process that is so incredibly important. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers to elaborate and give a little bit more of an introduction and help share some of our content for today. And so I can make you both co-hosts, but I'm happy to monitor the chat and click through the PowerPoint if that's okay with you. Just let me know. But yeah, I will kick it. I think the first few slides are Chadwick. I'm not sure if that's if we're going or if y'all are collaborating, but you just let me know and I'll kick it over to y'all to get started.
Yeah, okay. Since my slides are first, I'll definitely go. Thank you for having me here today. It's great to speak to you all. Good to see Christina again, as we just got done with the summit a few weeks ago. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the Legacy Initiative, and I'll start with a little bit about Campus Vote Project. So as Lizzie said, Campus Vote Project is a nonpartisan voting nonprofit who we put out information and we institutionalize work on campuses to make sure that students aren't being inadvertently disenfranchised and to make sure they're getting the right information at the right time. So in an effort to continue this work and also expand this work, in 2019, we created the Legacy Initiative after, in preparation for the upcoming general election. We looked at the InSolve report from the last general election, which was 2016. And what we saw was a drop in Black student voting and HBCU student voting. Both of those dropped respectively. And so because we approach things in a way where we never want to assume that students don't want to vote, we decided to do some research into the barriers that may be causing these students not to vote. And in that effort, what we did was put together some conversations and have some conversations with some HBCU students. You can go on to the next slide. So we had two what we called HBCU roundtables. This was a joint effort between Campus Vote Project's Legacy Initiative and NAACP Youth and College Division. The purpose of these conversations, like I said before, was to have an open, honest conversation with the students who are doing the work of voter engagement on HBCU campuses and see if they have identified any specific barriers that they feel are specific to their school and barriers that they feel are specific to them being an HBCU as well. So once we had those two conversations, we had about 45 students. We had 45 students participate with about 20 HBCUs that were represented in that conversation from different areas around the country. So once we did that, we put the insights brief together, which what we did is these 4 things are not indicative of every single barrier that these students are facing. But these 4 things that you see here, which we call our major themes, those are the 4 things that emerged throughout the conversation. That no matter what campus these students were on, no matter what region of the country, no matter what size, they all have run into at least 2 or 3 of these on their campus. And so we decided to concentrate everything down to these 4, since those were the more universal barriers that the students were running into. So we have misinformation and counterproductive communication with fellow students, lack of administration support for campus work, contentious relationships with local elected officials and offices, and intermittent engagement with candidates and third-party organizations. So in the insight brief, what you'll find is each one of those has contributing factors and prospective solutions. And we put that out to start a conversation about how organizations, elected officials can better support HBCUs, because it's not enough to just tell HBCU students to do better. It's also necessary to bring everyone to a common ground and to make sure that these students are being approached in the right way and are being engaged in the most genuine way. And so I'll stop there. I'll pass it on to Christina to see if she wants to talk about anything. And then I guess I can answer questions about the insights brief and then the work as we go along.
Thank you, Chad. So yeah, we literally just got off the hills, and I'm actually still in the midst of this. And for the screen, can you, if it's okay, Leslie, can you show my slides on the screen? I'm not sure. Are they on there?
Mhm.
Yeah, they should. Yep, they're up there.
Oh, they're not on my screen. Okay,
Is your first slide the Andrew
there we go.
Goodman Foundation?
Perfect. I see it now. After all of these, it feels like years of using Zoom in quarantine. You'd think I know it backwards and forth, but thank you so much. And thank you first, Leslie, for this invitation before I even get started, and this opportunity to share with campuses and to talk about this work, especially in this moment where it's so incredibly important to talk about what we as a nation, but even in our little micro communities of universities, are doing to continuously lean on this American promise and kind of be the nation that we are and we ultimately strive to be. And then also, of course, to Chad for this work. We literally are on the heels of the first ever gathering of historically Black colleges and universities nationally to do campus voting plans, which unfortunately, that's, 2020 is late for them, or for that to have happened, but I'm glad that it is happening, and also glad about the commitment to support historically Black colleges and universities. So my name is Christina Sanders, and I'm the Senior Program Manager of Expansion for the Andrew Goodman Foundation. And what that means is that I am responsible for looking at where the network is, how the network will need to grow in order to reach the mission or to deepen our work in the mission and the vision of the foundation, which is based and rooted in voting and engaging students, diverse students that represent all facets of America, but to make sure that elections are free and continuously fair. And part of that, in a big part, or what is the anchor to that legacy, is Andrew Goodman himself. Initially, I wasn't going to share this slide, but I feel like on the heels of some of the recent events happening in the country, that it's important to share some of the story. The reason why Andrew Goodman was in Mississippi was to help be a part of the student groups. By the way, students, I mean, we're in a good place because students are the ones, young people are the only ones who have ever changed the world in big ways and have moved people and countries towards their creed. But that's what they were doing in the 60s. They were in the South, and they were assisting Blacks in the South and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas to get registered to vote because the hurdles were literally life-threatening. And so a church burnt down. Long story short, a church burnt down, and Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner went to go check on the church, and they were kidnapped and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. They were only in Mississippi to help people to get registered to vote, to do what it is what democracy does. And from that, not just that, but all of the events, but that was one of the events that really led to a national conversation about how the laws have to change. I don't know if you all have seen the movie Mississippi Burning. And I've just learned this, unfortunately, within the last 6 months, and I've been at the foundation longer than that the movie was kind of based and rooted around this story, whereas all kind of incidents have been happening, but when you saw the diversification of the voices who were demanding that the values, and you can go to the next slide, the values of the country were values that were granted to everyone, that is something that really catapulted people who may have never thought of Blacks not being able to vote as a part of Americans not being able to vote, and even how it jeopardized the American process and the American democracy. And I'll tell you right now, our students are in this same situation. The things that they're going through, young people all across, I mean, us too, even though we're in quarantine, this is a very interesting and challenging moment for our nation and for democracy itself. And though it's not, well, it is that brutal, but it is, we're luckily in a position where we have access to more resources, we have access to more infrastructure, we have access to even more support to be able to change, move quickly, move swiftly to address concerns, hurdles, and any roadblocks that current students may have with voting. Initially, it was people of color, women, certain people who didn't have money, who didn't own land, who didn't automatically get a guaranteed right to vote, and saw that their vote was being chiseled away. However, we see that not only just people of color right now that are getting challenged, we see students are becoming more so the target of voter suppression, of groups to be able to suppress. And that is something that we have moved towards really digging into with the HBCU piece of it. Black students don't have the same type of infrastructure, or Black universities are less likely to have the same type of infrastructure as many PWIs, predominantly white institutions, even for resources. What we found in our work is that the campuses that we do have champions on, so we have a network that has 2 ambassadors as partners, and then a champion on each campus who's an administrator or a faculty member. On those campuses, we find that whereas one job is 6 to 7 people on a predominantly white institution campus, on our HBCU campuses, there's one person doing 10 jobs, and not 10 little jobs, 10 big jobs. And it's not that anything except for wanting to make sure that their students have access to the things that allow them to be marketable, that allow them to be competitive, that allow them to have the experiences that colleges give and offer students when they go into the real world. And they figure out how to get these things done, but we notice that there is a very big difference between universities in that way. And so one of the reasons for even targeting HBCUs during coronavirus was not only do people of color experience continual things to disenfranchise them or challenges with access, and then students on top of that receiving or being at the end of so many challenges with access, you have this coronavirus where you see people of color who are dying at almost 3 times the rate of anybody who's being exposed to the virus. And so voting in person is a challenge. Voting by mail is a challenge. Access is a challenge. We organized initially presidents from historically Black universities just to talk about how they could be prepared. Many of them, I just got off a call with Langston University, their dorms are at 95% capacity. And they're still doing a hybrid model, but their dorms are still at 95% capacity. And so that means their students are on campus and will be voting at campus. And should they choose to vote at campus, they'll be voting at campus. And so the situation for them trying to figure out how to get those students to the polling locations safely, and also, you mentioned, Leslie, about being able to be a poll worker, also getting them involved in being poll workers so that they actually can have polling locations where their campus is something that those campuses and those administrators really wanted to figure out. So the HBCU effort was really about giving them the tools, the information, the tactics, what are campuses doing, how to vote safely with COVID, how to do absentee ballots. In Alabama, some of our campuses are having to print out and make the copies of the IDs in their living rooms because the students have to have those in the packets in order to request those in order to be able to vote. And so the training was helpful, or the summit was helpful, but what we've done at Andrew Goodman Foundation is we thought about how can we continue to support these campuses with the resources that we have access to immediately. So we created this emergency COVID cohort, and it's of about 21 HBCUs. We did receive a grant from SLSB and Facebook to be able to give a small grant to campuses, but we've complemented that grant to increase it to $1,000 activity grant so that they can be able to bus their students. Many of them are leaving campus early, so it's going to be right at the voting deadline. And they need to bus them to a location that's not near campus. And so they're able to do that with some of these emergency resources, but we also offer mentoring and coaching to the champions as well as the students. And these are resources that your campuses can think about what you have that you can offer, not just to students who are from other campuses necessarily, but also like there may be groups on your campus who may represent communities that may have more hurdles than other groups on your campus, including not having access to their ID if you're in an ID state, not knowing the information about how to vote absentee. So these are things you can do, but this is what we're doing as a network for new campuses. We're doing mentoring for the administrators, peer-to-peer, letting our current network campuses work with them. So if you have groups on your campus who know how to do absentee voting or who know how to do, mail-in or voting or how to sign up for the polls, having them to connect with some of the students some of the student groups, the Black fraternities and sororities, the NAACPs, the Black student unions, to make sure that there is this level of engagement, that information is being transferred if it's not already there. We're also, because we're digital, offering trainings and webinars and different things. And the things that we have going on in our network, we're making those things available to historically Black colleges and universities. And one of the biggest things that we're happy to offer is the legal access. So our in-house attorney, as well as our attorneys that we have, that work with the foundation, they're helping to monitor what's happening. We're seeing like these pop-ups of like the secretaries of states are making up the laws and changing the laws almost every day. And so we're working with them in our network to be able to not just like have the summit be something, but to learn what we can about how even beyond this election, how we can better support historically Black colleges and universities. And even though you may not be a network with HBCUs, I think the same notion and the same thoughtfulness and mindfulness is the road to just intentionally thinking about what types of infrastructure those groups may not have that other groups have and may need, even if it's just things like supporting them and making sure they get information and access. And I think I may be over my time a little bit, but that's all.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Chadwick, I don't know what your preference is, but I was wondering if you might be able to, I'm going to go back to, if you might be able to share some of the insights. So you talked about the insight report has some like next steps or things campuses can do. And I'm just wondering, for those of us who haven't yet seen that, I did put the link in the chat, but what are some highlights, insights, things that you were hearing from students about what they wish they had on campus or what they were hoping for in terms of like voter access and education?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll dig into each one of these a little bit more. And I'll add some stuff that's not in the insight brief, just some like anecdotal stories that we ran into as well. So the part about misinformation and counterproductive communication with fellow students, talking to the students, we discovered that a lot of the students understand the importance of voting, but they don't necessarily understand the mechanics, right? Where should I register to vote? What information do I need? And what do I need to do as a voter to make sure like I'm not being purged, or, where do I vote for early voting if it's not already on campus, as well as some, what we call just like intracultural conversations about, how voting has worked for Black people and African Americans, just throughout time, and, what has it really done for us, and just people having those type of questions. And so the students really talked about the concerning part of that, of how to get their peers to the polls with all of those things, factual and false, in both of those realms to get their fellow students to the polls. So then when we talk about lack of administrative support for campus work, so this part kind of fell into two buckets for us. So on one end, the lack of administrative support was a byproduct of the fact that some campuses don't have enough resources. Kind of like Christina said earlier, to where some, the average PWI campus has a number of people doing it. At some of the HBCUs, you have just one person trying to do as much work as they can. So with that one person doing work, they find it hard to, mentor students and oversee students, as well as getting all of that stuff out. And so the support is not there because the resources are not there, but the work is still being done on kind of like a shoelace budget, shoelace energy type of way. And then the other bucket that it fell into was concerns about funding. So because some of the private HBCUs receive funding from numerous sources, some of those institutions shy away from seeming too active or too political in order to not upset their some of the funders that they have, because although those funders don't support that specific work or may have an adverse reaction to that specific work, they do support other important parts on their campus that help with the everyday run-of-the-mill things that happen on that campus. So as to not upset them or endanger that funding source, then some administrations are put into a corner of just saying, well, we won't outright do anything, but if students want to do something, they can. And so those were the two buckets with the lack of administrative support. So that can happen in two ways. So contentious relationships with local elected officials and offices. So another thing about some of the HBCUs, some of the rural HBCUs, and even some of the more urban HBCUs, depending on where they are, some of them are in communities that hold very different political and ideological views than the majority of the students on their campus. And so what this causes is the barrier of them having those resources because of the opportunity that it may upset the political balance in that city. And so what we've seen, one of the stories that we ran up against was an institution in Texas where the students were working really hard to get a polling location on their campus. They did all the paperwork, fulfilled all the requirements, got all the way for, I think it was the city council, to make a final decision on whether or not they could have the polling location. And so because of the fact that the election at that time was right around their time for homecoming, which is a two-week event at most HBCUs, someone on the city council decided that they don't need it because they'll be worried about homecoming and they won't be worried about voting, and therefore they don't need a polling location. And that's just, one of the decisions that was made based on the stereotype of HBCU students, based on the idea to continue to restrict access to the polls for HBCU students, because the truth is they wouldn't even have to make that decision if that statement was true, right? Because the students never would have done the work to get to them, never would have fulfilled all the requirements for that decision to even have to be made. So that's one for that. And then intermittent engagement with candidates and third-party organizations. So that is, and it says candidates specifically and not elected officials, because that is surrounded by the fact that HBCU campuses also suffer from two barriers, right? From being students and as well from being predominantly Black institutions, right? With predominantly Black student bodies. So what this means is that just like for some candidates and for some organizations, the Black vote is really only pushed the last 3 to 6 weeks of the election, right? And so you have all of these organizations coming onto their campus, asking them to sign T-shirts, asking them to sign sign-ups and things, people they don't know, people they've never seen, who are engaging them in a way that is obviously either misinformed or underinformed about them as students and them as individuals. They are usually approached as if they all hold the same ideologies, they hold the same political views. And so with that, it's the students said that we don't feel like we have enough engagement with these people in order to even listen to them, in order to even have these conversations, because when they do engage us, then most of the conversation is around what they think we want and not even asking questions and have an idea about what means something to us as individuals and as a campus as a whole. So those were some of the points that were brought out during these conversations, some of the feelings. And, you know, I can't go without saying that these students who are saying these things, these are the more active students, right? These are the students out there doing the work. So if these are their feelings, then we have to imagine what the freshman on campus is feeling like. We have to imagine what the person who's already decided not to vote because of these same issues feel like. And I'll go back to the local elected officials part as well. One thing that came out of the conversation was that their interaction with local elected officials seeds mistrust of the whole electoral process, because the mindset is that if the people who are already elected aren't paying attention to us, then the chances of us supplanting their power and exercising this right to vote to supplant their power are much, much lower, because the people who are over the electoral process now are already trying to get us away from the polls or block us from the polls before we even have the chance to vote. So those are some things that came up and some discussions we had with the students, and that are all in that insights brief.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And no need to turn on your cameras. I know people can be zoomed out. It's in the afternoon, I get it. But I'm hoping now that we might be able to talk a little bit about some questions that people might have. One question that I have is, so, you know, I don't know what institutional types a lot of our people are on, but for those of us who aren't at HBCUs, who might be at PWIs or might be at MSIs or whatever the institutional type is, so we have, you know, I don't know, 40 something days. I haven't counted recently, some small amount of days that we have until the election. And so, you know, these institutional structural things are not, you know, things that we're going to accomplish by the election, right? But there is still a push for helping to educate students around, you know, how to get the word out. And so what are some things that your organizations have done in the COVID era that you found to be really successful or impactful for students that we might take a look at in this short time that we have left before the election actually happens?
Yeah, so I mean, I think just educating, using, and I know you said not institutional, but I feel like that is the road. With COVID, it won't be like necessarily the permanent institutional changes, but like using the instruments that are available on your campus. So we're working with a lot of administrators who are oddly coming to us asking for tools and like information and access to My Vote Everywhere, because they want to know things just like how to tell them where their polling location is, how to vote by mail, absentee, how to be poll workers, because there's a big push for that as well. So I think if you have an emergency texting system, you can ask if y'all can send out something through your emergency texting system that says, and it doesn't have to be that system. There are plenty of systems that campuses have. Climate web, you know, there's just plenty of systems through the email, through the classrooms, any type of system where you know that you engage most of your audience on basic reminders, sending them a reminder that early voting starts today. Here's what early voting is. Like, see if you're registered. Even the voter registration deadline is coming up for many states. So here's the voter registration, you know, information. Check to see if you're registered. Register online, and of course, basing it in accordance to what your university and that locality's policies are. But I think, like right now for the universities, it's really gonna have to be all hands on deck. And it doesn't have to be all the mediums, but like really honing in on those 2 to 3 interfaces that you know the majority of your students interface with the university, and they read these things and putting something out through those places, standard things that are nonpartisan, of course. And then the other thing that we're doing is going into the classroom. So where we have younger students, so at Tougaloo College in Mississippi, all of the freshman classes are classes where they are allowing them to come in, the ambassadors to go in for 20 minutes and to do like a quick, like how to get registered to vote, how to do absentee, how to do mail-in, because the younger students are going to have more questions, likely have more questions. And we have to remember, this is the first time many students are voting in a presidential election. And we assume that people know how, but the basics on how to vote, people don't know how to vote. And explaining that to government professors, there may be opportunities where it comes to those places, those because the younger the student, the more vulnerable of a population they should be considered, not just the communities of color, but because they're so new and they're like 18 years old and 19. Helping them to understand that. And I think those two things are key. That's the biggest thing you could do, is use your two or three places where you interface with the campus. And then just doing the traditional things, education, making sure all of your organizations have the information they need to get out to their people. Like Chad said, the right information. If there are links, if you have to be the clearinghouse or SGA or somebody, or if we have to share it, like just the right information to all of the young leaders, just email them that and make sure they have it, and allow them to get it out on digital, and the university as well. And I know, Chad, you may have some other recommendations as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to everything that Christina said, use what you have at your disposal. One of the ways that we've been telling and educating administrations and even students about digital organizing is it's all about your intent. It's not that you have to change your intent, it's that you have to change your methods. So things like, how are you engaging with your students on social media? Because now more than ever, social media is a place for information. When you look at everybody, all the superstars and all of the initiatives that are going on with voting, students are already getting their voting information from social media. So it's a good idea for institutions to use that social media to give them voting information specific to their campus, right? So specific to, where the closest polling location is for the campus, specific to how to fill out the online registration with the name of your dorm, or how to do it compared to what dorm you're at. So it's really the institutions continuing to engage these students like they always have, but kind of changing that message in a place where it makes things easier. Because when we talk about access to the polls, it's about clearing that access, and a lot of that is through just simply not having the information. And some of these students don't know the questions to ask, right? So it's best to give them the answers to those questions before they even have to ask them. One of the, specific things that we tell people to do is, like, for students and for professors who have control over their Blackboard or whatever platform that they're using. If you're not able to have an ambassador come, or you just don't have the time, or, whatever the case may be, what you can also do is create a permanent banner in that Blackboard, or even if you're over the Blackboard for the whole institution or for the whole major, put that on the login page, put that on the class page, so they'll see that reminder. They'll see that reminder every time they log in. Are you registered? If you are registered, where are you registered? If you're going to do vote by mail, right? Have you requested it? 1, 2, how do you know when the day is for you to start checking on that if you haven't received it? One of the things that we've been talking about is registration and confirmation, because even some of those people who are already registered need to confirm their different information. And because of the influx of vote by mail that we're going to be seeing, because of the influx of these problems, the onus has been put on the individual and not necessarily on the voting institutions now, because they're dealing with this massive change of COVID and vote by mail. So those are just some of the things that we advise the institutions to do, and in different ways to reaching their students.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Luis, for putting exactly 40 days from today. That is the election. Will we have results? I don't know, we'll see. But probably not, no. I have another question, if people don't have a question or a thought. Anyone have a question? Okay, and I don't even know if this is going to be rambling thought or what is happening with this, but at UNCG in 2016 or in 2012, our Black student vote was very high. And then like in our unsolved report was very high. And then it kind of dipped in 2016. And I was listening to NPR this morning, and one of the things they were saying is like, at the end of the day, it's two old white guys running for president, and I know it's more than just the presidential election. But one of the things that I hear from some of our Black students and students of color is just, I'm not excited about either. I'm either very adamantly against one and not just excited about the other. And so like, what's the point of me even being engaged in this process? And so I'm wondering, like, what are some conversations that you're hearing from students about things that get them energized about being engaged in the process if they're not excited, or if they're adamantly against the presidential candidate process? What are some things that you might be hearing?
Well, I mean, I haven't worked directly with students, recently on the ground, but I'll say that in general, what I'm hearing from the network is just talk to them, educating those students, especially the Black students, about the process. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, those things are not just T-shirts, they're real for young people. And it's real for Black students, and especially, Black female students, and really educating them about how laws are made, like who sets these policies, how does this case get treated one way and this case get treated another way, even back to the things that they understand and that they've seen their whole lives, like Trayvon Martin, like understanding you elect people through voting, and about, I think helping them understand democracy is not like fast food. For so long, and I think people forget this, Blacks were left out intentionally of the electoral process. So whereas other groups have had some type of history or family and this long-standing relationship with democratic engagement, this is still very fairly new. And so while we see that Black women participate at higher rates than anyone else, and young Black women are, outvoting their peers by double digits, it does not mean that they can connect the political process to voting itself. And I think that there has to be more education about the institution of voting and connecting it back to the democratic process. And this whole thing about America is like this white guy and this other white guy. No, ultimately we're talking about buildings. It is the energy that is flowing through these systems that decide. There's no bucket of laws making it rain. People are waking up and making decisions. And I think understanding the policy process, they won't take their votes for granted more, in terms of holding people accountable, and learning that system in a way. I think the way that they participate and vote, that will be the way that they will be political actors, and they will get that. Because right now it's just vote, and it's not like the personal, what it has to do with me, because the relationship historically is new and challenged when it comes to Black participation in America.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that one of the things we have been stressing to students, and which has helped, like, it's been hard to deal directly with students because of COVID. But in these conversations, one of the things that we've been telling the students is we have to position voting as the bare minimum, right? And we have to start talking about holistic civic engagement, to where, these students understand their power as constituents, because whether or not your decided person gets the vote, that does not take your power away as a constituent. And so it's about you vote, then you hold accountable, then you stay updated, and then you vote again. So we have to position it as a cycle of civic engagement and civic activity to help them to imbue hope in a way to where, like, whenever we get the results, which will be probably days from November the 3rd, whenever we get those results, like, now a different type of work begins. It's not that your work is ending, a different type of work begins. What is citizen lobbying? Who are you as a constituent? What is that position or that cause that you will make sure that is known about locally, statewide, and nationally? So just, giving the students other options in preparation for winning, or, well, perceived winning and perceived losing, because it's all perceived based on who you are and, your ideological leanings. And so that's one of the things that we've been trying to get students to do and get students to understand, is that, now is a different type of work. There'll always be work to be done. And so, when this is over, you either take time to celebrate, take time to mourn, but whatever happens after you mourn and after you celebrate, you get back to work.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So I know we just have a few minutes left. We're going to share this recording out with our larger network because, it's busy time. But my last thought is, and we were just talking about this today in a larger meeting, is kind of alluding to what y'all were both talking about continuing the work. And so we're starting to get asked on campus about, like, hey, what are you doing post-election? What type of events are you having? What type of conversations are you doing? And so do y'all have any specific resources or documents or planning pieces that we might be able to look to that could help us start to think about what we're going to do post-election?
So I know for the foundation, we do have some specifics with our campuses and some specifics with expansion to new places. But if I can just offer, because I know that a lot of times, maybe I can be assuming this, but faculty and staff, and I know graduate students have spoken to me about this. If they're not Black or they're not a person of color, it can be challenging, and just looking for whatever they can do to be helpful or to just get the process, because it can be, sad and intimidating in its own way, in a very, a lonely way, because it's not feeling a part of it. And I would encourage that as the leaders, as the anchors on your campus. I know in many states you can't just jump out there and protest and say, hey, we're gonna start a fire, and please don't do that. Don't start fires on your campus, please. But you might can't do that. But there's an opportunity to get very serious about what you, as a leader, as a staple, you have been given this space and this opportunity, and you can't write it down, but you can be mindful about how to navigate your community, your campus community, understanding the politics, understanding how people feel, to really make the institutional piece better, but to really create something. And it may not be overnight. Some campuses may be easier than others, but I think it is an opportunity to really get thoughtful about what you can do, what you can build, what you can leave. And it's the same work that the Fannie Lou Hamers of the world did. They were very thoughtful. They were having to say things in a certain way, but helping students sometimes, especially in tough climates, it may be difficult to reach them, but your campus, your administration. So I think thinking about how to be thoughtful about something you can do, even if nobody really, really knows what it is that you're trying to achieve. I think we're in that moment in order to achieve some of the things we have to achieve, so that in 20 years, we're not repeating the same things that happened 20 years ago and 40 years ago. And that's the only thing I could offer is whatever idea that you'd like to implement, I think really tapping into an ultimate goal and just kind of creating an ease of space of access long-term.
Yeah, one of the things that we try to push our state student guides, and but specifically for students of color and HBC. If you're working with students of color and you're not a person of color, I think what would definitely help is, I always say, research. We don't, as Campus Vote Project, we don't have any specific things around that right now other than the insights brief. But I think that the insights brief itself adds some great questions and a great foundation. We are also having a few what we call our legacy conversation series starting on September 30th, where we'll be digging deeper into these conversations with special guests, with local elected officials, with people who are trained on misinformation and disinformation. And I'll send all that information out to you, Lindsay, so you can send it out to everybody else. And what our plan for that is to start the conversation, because the issues that the Black community is dealing with, that people of color in this country are dealing with, are not new. And because they're not new, they're not slated to go anywhere without tons of work and anytime soon. And so what those conversations are for is to build off of the insights brief, as well as create opportunities for things beyond 2020. Because as we know, in 2022, there are going to be tons of midterm elections going on, in terms of local elections going on. So starting to ask those questions of how do we get campuses ready for that in their areas and in their states.
The work never stops, right? It never stops.
Never.
Okay, I just want to check in one more time, see if we have any more questions. But if not, like I said, we will share this recording with everybody, and any resources that I get, I will be happy to share them out with folks. We're all in this good fight together, trying to do good things to educate our students and make our communities more informed. And I think, to Christina's point, that's, it's all of our responsibilities. But if you're in this work on a day-to-day basis, then taking up that charge is a big one and an important one. So thank you both so much for spending some time with us and sharing resources and the amazing work that your organizations are doing. We love to learn more, support more, partner when we can. So thank you for being here, and thanks everyone for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your whatever day it is. I can't keep track. I think it's Thursday. So enjoy the rest of the day, stay safe, and I'll be sending this out soon.
All right, thank you for having me. You have a great day. Everyone have a great day.
Bye.